If you do have a question, if you have a question, I encourage everyone to use the chat. That way, once the presentation is finished, we can, I can kind of go through those questions, so that, you can get the answers that you need. And then if you do have like a sidebar question or a question, I always say when it comes to finances, you may not want to ask in front of a group of individuals. That's okay. Just let me know and I'll, provide a means to contact me and, I will, be glad to answer your question. So like I talked about today, budgeting and personal finance is our topic. Once again, I'm Ron, Owen, and I will be your presenter for today. So a little bit about me just to get started. I was born and raised in a town called South Boston, Virginia. It's a really small town. I always say you probably never heard of it unless you know somebody from there or you've met, been passing through. But I said I was raised there. A lot of my family still lives there. Very near and dear to my heart. But that's where I'm from originally. I attended Old Dominion 2004, 2008, which brought me to the area. Is where I actually started attending ABC, as a college student. A friend was attending there, brought me, to a service. And I was kind of on and off for a little while, going to ABC. But then, 2014, I officially became a member of ABC and, been, a member since then. I'm married, fathered 3 children. I'm sure I see my kids there, from time to time and the different ministries, that we have going on. As far as my financial background, I started my career Enterprise Rent-A-Car, worked there for a couple of years, but I've been in banking for 14 years. I've been a manager for 9 years, be 10 years this year. So very familiar with the banking. I work for Wells Fargo, just, throw that out there for anyone who, may have, some individual need with help with that. Been with them my whole career. Been in between Norfolk and Virginia Beach, in that time frame. I'm currently in Virginia Beach now, but I spent years in Norfolk as well. So, very, very versed in this area of finance. And a part of my role is just helping, bankers and tellers, help customers meet their financial needs. And as far as me, I have a real passion for helping, people and providing guidance and advice, to help them reach their financial goals. I think a lot of times, people, don't know where to start when it comes to finances, and they don't know, and another thing too, like nowadays, there's so much information. It's kind of like information overload. I think a lot of people get paralyzed by getting so much information and never know where to start. So that's kind of where I enjoy helping people, navigate that part of their financial journey. Also, like I said, I've been with Wells Fargo for a while. So, it's been nice. I've gotten to know people, gotten to know their family, gotten to, see them, go from having a kid to maybe now the kids starting school. A lot of people I met, their child was in high school, now they graduate college and get married. So, really seeing people through their financial journey, is one of the things I enjoy about what I do. So tonight's learning intention, what I would like everyone to get from this session is just some tips, tools, and strategies that you can implement into your personal finances. I'll reference it a lot, but it's so much information. There's so many different strategies and tools that you can use. And what I know is like some are applicable to some people. Sometimes you have to cherry pick a part of the strategy. Sometimes you just gotta follow the strategy to start. But it's very important that you start somewhere. And, with this presentation, I hope we'll just kind of give you like some explanation on some of the tools and the tips and different things like that that you can just begin to implement. And my hope is that, you will find like one or two takeaways that you can implement immediately to improve your financial situation. Also let it's no one cure, for a financial situation. I tell a lot of customers I work with, it's no magic wand you can wave over your finances and just make everything okay. It's one of those things where it takes work, just like everything else that we do, whether that's, whatever career field you're in, it takes like daily work, daily commitment to be able to thrive in your finances. And, what a lot of successful people do is just, develop their roadmap, and hopefully today you will find some things that you can implement into your roadmap as your journey begins. So tonight's agenda, we'll start off with just exploring the why. I think it's a little bit self-explanatory, why finances is important, but we'll, talk about that. We'll talk about creating a budget. A lot of, the finances start with the budget. When we talk about, investing, when we talk about mortgages, when we talk about growing your finances, long-term planning, a lot of it starts with managing your current finances in the appropriate way. I'll go over some ways that you can do protection, protect your funds. We'll touch on investment a little bit as far as like once your budget is implemented, different options you can have. I'll give you some budgeting strategies. I will walk us through a budget, the 50-30-20 budget, but there are different budgeting strategies that may work better for you in your situation. I'll also give you some strategies for debt elimination. I think as, a country, it's kind of hard to live in America and not have debt in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So I'll go over just some ways that you can eliminate some debt and some ideas that I have around that and have been proven to work for different people. And then we'll talk about some ways for saving as well, just some different ideas that you could try to implement to make your savings, grow faster. So establishing a why, this is a stat I pulled from CNBC that 73% of Americans say money is the number one stress in their life, which is a very, very alarming stat. In today's times, I mean, we have everything going on from the tariffs to the government jobs to, just day-to-day spending, the price of eggs, the price of everything at the grocery store, everything you want to buy seems like it is more expensive today than it was yesterday. So no surprise, many Americans find money very stressful. Uh, that's why money is so important. One thing I want to emphasize with money too, money is a tool that allows you to purchase the things you want and need. So a lot of people that I encounter have a lot of, emotional attachment to money, but, a lot of the wealthy people that, whether you listen to on podcasts, listen to on YouTube, follow, have met maybe yourself, a lot of them, don't have that same attachment to money. A lot of them use it to get what they need, whether that's to purchase a product, whether that's to purchase something that makes additional income. They don't have so much of a tie to money, and I think it's important that you understand how money works and what money is used for, and it's a tool. Money is not really worth as much if it didn't allow you to do the things you need to do. Understanding how money allows you to make smarter choices. It also can lead you to, stability and independence. A lot of times when you're financed in a certain, way, it makes it harder to go to work when if something happened with this job, today that, you don't know how you may feed your family, you don't know how you may pay your bills. And that's where a lot of that stress comes from. But I do believe, if you manage your money in the right way and you have, your emergency saving, things like that, it does make it easier in day to day living when hey, if something does happen that's outside of my control, whether it's a layoff or something like that, hey, I can hold the ship steady until I can get my footing back. And I think it's some power, in that ability to, manage your finances. Want to share a quote from Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins is an author, wrote a great book, Money Master the Game. It's a very, very long book, but I would encourage you if you, want a reading to start off on your financial journey. It's a great read. They do have an audio book as well. But this quote is, stop being the chess piece, start being the chess player. It's time to master the game of money once and for all. I like this quote for two reasons. One, money often controls us versus us controlling our money. That comes in the form of debt and bad money habits. A lot of times, a lot of people, do things for money. Sometimes money will have people doing things that they won't normally do. I'll just share, in my field, I've seen, brothers and sisters, parent pass and they in the branch, arguing about who's going to get this money, who's going to get that money. And I've also seen it on the other hand where, when parents, plan things accordingly, it's not that bickering and infighting. And a lot of times when I'm assisting people who, are going through that struggle of losing someone close to them, it's just eye-opening when you see, how money has changed, the relationship that, two people may have had for a very long time. But it does happen. And then we also talk about bad money habits. Once again, I do think that our economy, our environment leads us to get bad money habits in order to keep control over our lives. So it's very important that we develop good money habits. Second reason, this quote resonates with me because it's important to take action. So, like, it'll be a lot of information, that I provide today and through the other seminars, but I do believe you have to actually take action on something. And sometimes, I'll let people know, like, you may figure out that what you take an action on, is not, you may need to make a change or make an adjustment, but that's okay. It's just important to move forward. Finances can be overwhelming and you may feel stuck. But once again, I encourage you to take one thing, from this presentation and just try to implement it. And you'll find that, like I said, even if you have to make a tweak, even if you have to make an adjustment, it'll get you farther along than if you don't start anywhere. I wanted to share some statistics, that I uncovered. 56% of Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency. 34% of Americans have zero in savings. $8,942 is the average credit card balance. 70% of Americans do not have long-term financial goals. So, a lot of those stats, as I, was researching and preparing for this, it wasn't anything I didn't know already, but, it's very, very alarming when you think about, $1,000 emergency, as we all know now, that can happen very fast, a medical bill, a car issue, very, very quick, something that $1,000 come up. Having zero in your savings, just once again, it makes life very stressful, knowing that if something comes up, you don't have a way to meet that need. And then we look at, you don't have 1,000 in savings, you don't have 1,000 emergency fund, you have zero in savings, but then, the average American has roughly $9,000 in credit card debt, which, I always call credit cards a necessary evil because, you need them to really be able to function in society and be able to get loans and different items like that because you need them reporting to your credit, but they also designed to keep you in the cycle of, only paying back the interest. So, for that $9,000 credit card, your payment is probably nowadays probably $200, $300 with probably 150 to 200 of that going just to the entrance of the card. And 70% of Americans do not have a long-term financial goal, which is very, very important, whether that's, a retirement age, whether that's, some type of purchase you want to make, home buying, rental property, different things like that. Goals help us stay focused on the day-to-day activity. And I'm sure if you look up the stats, you will see that, many people who set goals for themselves, even if you don't hit that goal, you still are further along than someone who has no goal. So I wanted to share that because it's very, very important that, you have some type of financial goal for yourself, even if it's just to, eliminate debt, even if it's just to save $10 a month, some type of goal, that you set for yourself and just talking to people about finances, for a living, you can see the difference in the people who set goals for themselves versus the ones who just, live in the day-to-day grind. So today, we'll kind of centralize on creating a budget, and I will kind of walk you through some different tips and different things that you can use to set up your budget. A budget helps you to understand where your money is going. It allows you to decide where your money is going versus wondering. How many people have been in that situation where you look at your bank account and you're like, man, I could have sworn I had more money than I actually have. And then you go back and look at those transactions and then you're like, yes, yes, yes. I made all these transactions. And it's like, man, a lot of times, no pastor says it seems like it's more month than more than money. So, it's one of those things where, that's the importance of having a budget, because it allows you to earmark, where the money is going and understand, where the money is going. Oh, for the purpose of this, just to kind of give you an idea of how to create a budget, I chose the budget it's called 50/30/20 budget. 50% of your income goes for your needs, 30% goes for your wants, 20% goes to your savings. I will let you know, I will go over some other options, because I know for the general, people that I run into, they already surpass like 50% of their income on needs and wants. So there are other options, but just for the purpose of helping you create a budget, I chose this option. So once again, the budget starts with the plan. In this budget, you set allocation of your income in these three categories. Before I get started in that, I did want to say, when we talk about the tithe, Pastor, does a great job of, letting us know, but the tithe comes out before the budget begins. So I wanted to, set that for our system as well. So we take that off the top, and then what's left, we break down in this 50/30/20. Also, let you know, if you're looking for a calculator to help you figure out, what is those exact numbers and those amounts. If you're not familiar, it's a website called NerdWallet, NERDWALLET. That's a great resource when it comes to financial education, but they do have a calculator that will allow you to put in your income, and it'll break it down for you as far as what goes, what amount technically, goes in each category. So we have needs. In this one, you separate 50% of your income from all primary needs. These include food, clothing, and shelter, making sure primary needs do not exceed 50%. Some other examples of needs, rent, mortgage, utilities, insurance, electricity. A lot of these expenses are what we call fixed, where they will not be, it's not easy to adjust. So for example, if your rent is nowadays, 1,500 to 2,000 a month, there's really no negotiation on that once you lock into the rent. So that's going to be a fixed price for every single month you have to pay. A lot of our utilities, insurance, electricity, a lot of those are fixed expenses, but these are expenses that, we're going to categorize as you really can't live without. Food, we'll talk about that one a little bit more because it's different categories to that, but essentially, you can't live without some type of food. Clothing, once again, there's levels to that, but there is a difference between clothing and luxury items, which we'll touch on a little bit more. But needs is just those primary things that you have to have: food, shelter, utilities, insurance. We get into wants, which I believe is very, very important too. If you work for your money and your money comes in, that from talking to people about finances, it's hard to just earmark all the money out but not treat yourself. And if you try to go into a budget where you don't allow some type of money to reward yourself for your work, I find that it's easy to stop the budget, and it's easy to just tap out on what you're doing. So I do think it's important to find some kind of happy medium where you can't treat yourself for all your hard work, but also you're still being smart about reaching your financial goals. But wants, the next 30% we can allocate to our wants. For example, eating out, planning for recreational activities, travel, Starbucks. This should not exceed 30%. If it's not used, these funds can be allocated to savings. So even when you have this want category, 30% can be a large amount for wants, depending on what you want to put in that bucket. But if you choose this strategy, and you say you only use 15% for this month because it's not really much going on, what you want to do is allocate that amount that you did not spend into your savings. Just some other examples of wants, like they talked about travel, entertainment, designer clothing, streaming, is a big one too. I'll just share, recently, of course now, for someone who has kids, you gotta have, Disney, you gotta have Netflix, you gotta have, you know, you have to have YouTube, and then for the parents, you want Max, and then you want Stars. And what I recently found out is, if you have your internet through Verizon or your phone through Verizon, you can get a package through your plan. So there, instead of paying, 10, 15, 15, 15, you just pay them 20, and then they'll give you access to like 5 different streaming platforms. So little things like that, when you're creating your budget and you're going through and looking where the money is, it's about finding alternatives. Do you need Stars and Max? Do you need them at the same time? Do you need Disney and Hulu? Because nowadays Disney and Hulu is the same, so you can get them all through one. So really, not necessarily just looking at the expenses and checking it off, but looking at different avenues to see if there's some way I can save money on this. If I really want. For those people who go to Starbucks every single day, hey, is there a way maybe I can go 3 times a week, and save the other 4, different things like that, where you have to find, the happy medium. We talk about also eating out, which is very, very expensive now. Do some people who like to eat out for lunch every day, do you eat out for lunch every day, or maybe do you, allocate that just to Fridays or just to Mondays, or, maybe try to go a week or 2 without eating out, just to kind of rein in some of those expenses that you may be incurring. And the last one, and this is savings. So, with this one, each paycheck, you should allocate 20% to your savings. This should be in a separate account, so you're not tempted to use it. I'm a firm believer in, you cannot have your savings mixed in with your checking account. See, a lot of people make that mistake, and, you don't have a separate account for savings. And just what ends up happening is, if you're not checking your account, pretty much after every transaction, you really just end up using that savings account. So highly encouraged to have, a separate savings account. A lot of people take the strategy as well as maybe they put it in a different bank or different way so that they don't see it or tempted to access it as well. Another strategy I'll give you is if doing 20%, to the savings, maybe do 10% at your primary bank and 10%, at a bank that you don't, do your everyday banking with. That way, you're not as tempted to see it, and you're not as tempted to transfer it back, because nowadays, like, you could just transfer it back, if you do online banking. So that's just a little tidbit as well that can help. Also, when we talk about savings, we think about retirement, which is in the form of 401k, IRA. Also, emergency fund. That's one of those topics where you'll find a lot of different varying opinions on, how much. Some people say 3 months, some people say 6 months, some people say a year, some people say 5 years. A good best practice I would say is, I would start 1 month. Try to get 1 month, of your expenses. And we talk about emergency fund. It's 3 months of the needs, short term or long term. So what I would recommend is start 1 month. Build it to 2 months. 3 months is probably like the starting point. And once again, that would be 3 months of your expenses, put to the side. So, if your rent is $1,000, that would be at least $3,000 that you have, for that item. And the reason for that is, like I said, just in the times that we live in today, you just never know, what can happen. And I hope for everyone that they don't have to encounter these situations, but you just never know when, something may come up, something may change. Company may change, may downsize, may move, all of these different factors that are beyond our control. You want to prepare yourself so that if one of these things happen, that, you can have peace of mind and knowing, okay, I have a little bit of footing so I can get, everything back on. So once you get your budget set, once you get everything up and running with that, which, hopefully won't take too long, the next step is protection. So how do you protect, what you've earned? In this one, the protection fund is obtained from 20% of the savings that we set aside each month. If the savings fund has reached 6 months of expenses, then we move on to step 3. But protection, different types of protection, it allows you to safeguard your assets and financial well-being against unforeseen events and risks. Couple of types of protection: emergency fund, which I touched on a little bit previously, insurance fund, whether that's health insurance in the form of, HSA or additional insurance, life insurance as well. These vehicles allow you to, get access to more funds. So once you've satisfied, 3 to 6 months worth of savings, definitely, life insurance, so that if something happens, for a parent, a spouse, you are leaving behind a legacy and not, leaving access to funds so people can, continue to live on. And that's where life insurance, really comes in. Health insurance, I mean, for anybody who's, been to the doctor, been to the hospital recently, those bills, can get very, very high. So there's different avenues that, like explain, like an HSA, which can allow you to put tax deductible money in order to pay for some of those additional expenses. And then we have the emergency fund as well, which the emergency fund is there just, in case of, some unforeseen incident happening. So step 3 would be investment. So once you get your budget going and you have that under control, you've got your protection, whether that's in, life insurance, that's, emergency savings. The next one is investment. So with investment, you can go to this, you allocate the funds for investment. This is not so big that we can choose from the following. One is invest in something that creates more income. There may be a rental property, there may be a business, there may be let's see, real estate properties, a CD, a certificate of deposit. A lot of banks offer those and they still have, good rates on those. And then we also get into financial instruments, which are bonds, stocks, mutual funds, ETF, exchange traded funds, and et cetera, et cetera. If you're curious about investing, next week we will do more of a deep dive into stocks and the stock market and different investment vehicles that can help accelerate your income. But investment, I truly believe, is something that has to be done in this time frame, because when we talk about, the price of different items, we talk about the income, talk about inflation. And at this time, for most Americans, the inflation is not inflation has surpassed your income. So, if you think about, eggs was $2, I guess 6 months ago, it's like $5 now. But when you think about your job, you don't get a $2 raise, in that time frame. So that's what I mean when I say inflation has surpassed our income. So for a lot of us, we have to look at different ways to, produce income to keep up with inflation, and investing in some other type of income driven asset, as well as, financial instruments, can help accelerate that income. Like I said before, I was going to talk about some other budgeting strategies, just in case the 50-30-20 is not something that, you feel is attainable, don't like it. There are plenty of options. And a lot of these options you can take advantage of. Google is everybody's best friend now, but that can help you. But I'll run down just a few of them and how they work, just to to give you some other ideas as well. We have the pay yourself first budget. Just prioritize savings by setting aside money in a savings account before paying expenses. So you automate your savings, setting a percentage to go directly into your savings account, and then adjust your budget accordingly. So, if you hourly, your budget can go, up and down depending on how many hours you work. So, in that situation where you would just earmark, hey, 20%, off of my paycheck is just going to go straight to savings. And then, I'll figure out the rest. So that is how that worked. And of course, in that situation, in all of these situations, when you have money left over, of course, you earmark that back into savings. But this one just focuses on the savings aspect of creating a budget. The next one is the zero-based budget. So this one is a budgeting method where every expense, both new and recurring, must be justified from the start of each budgeting cycle. So rather than relying on past spending, the goal is to assure funds are allocated efficiently to activities that align with strategic objectives. They generate the highest value rather than simply continuing previous spending habits. In essence, it requires a fresh evaluation of all expenses starting from zero. A zero-based budget is the framework that assigns $1 to every job. So with this type of budget, essentially every month, every paycheck, you would then evaluate, hey, do I need this at this time? Can I wait on this? Can I get this later? But essentially, before you spend every dollar you assessing. This one is a little bit more labor intensive, but I recommend if you have a lot of expenses and you don't know where to start, this one can help you, evaluate every time you get paid. Hey, do I really need this at this time? Can I push this back a few months? Can I if I have to get this, is there something else that I can cut out to compensate for having to spend that money? Like I said, this one is, like I said, very labor intensive, but for those who, are very task oriented and want to, really evaluate where every dollar is going, this can really help. We also have the envelope budgeting method. I will be very candid with this one. It involves cash, and we're moving to a space where not everywhere you go accepts cash. But with the envelope budgeting, it's very simple, but it is also effective as well. It involves assigning specific amounts of money to separate envelopes for various spending categories. This systems help individuals track their spending and prioritize expenses, and save money. The envelope method is a powerful way to fight overspending, especially in areas where you tend to go overboard, like food. So just to recap with this budget, essentially when you get paid, you would put, you'd have an envelope for food, you'd have an envelope for gas, you have an envelope for groceries, you have an envelope for daycare, you have each end of envelope for each item. And essentially once that the money runs out in the envelope, you're done with that for the month. So if you do like cash, not real big on cards, this is one, or if you get paid in cash a lot, this is one that can help you, rein in some of that spending. And last but not least, we have the 70-20-10. This approach to budgeting encourages setting aside 70% of your take-home pay for living expenses and discretionary purchases, 20% for savings and investing, and 10% for debt repayment or donations. So for example, let's say you take on $3,000 a month. This is how you would allocate your money if you use the 70-20-10 budget. You would designate $2,100 for monthly bills and spending. You would designate $600 in the savings or investment account, and you would earmark $300 for debt repayments or donations. So for a lot of people who, once again, have already surpassed 50%, which is not hard these days, of your expenses going over your income, this may be an option for you because it does allow 70%. So for example, like it explained, if you make $2,000 a month and your rent is already $1,000, well, then it's hard to stay within the 50-30-20 budget, because once you add on utilities and water and food, you've already surpassed 50%. So it can be discouraging. So this one here is a nice one where you can, already jump in and say, hey, I already know my expenses over 50%. So let me start with this one, but it still allows that 20% for savings. And then the 10% debt repayment is very, very important, because when we think about, the average credit card debt that Americans have, you have to start chipping away, at that. And the only way to do that is to, pay more money toward that debt. Next, just once again, when we talk about debt, segueing right into this slide, a lot of people have a lot of debt already. So then a lot of times the debt hinders us from being able to save more, being able to invest more, different opportunities. A lot of it's in line to the debt we have, whether that's good debt or bad debt. And good debt would be, assets, mortgage. We talk about bad debt, be things like, really high car payment, on a liability. But couple of different strategies here that you could use. One is the debt snowball. So the debt snowball is a repayment strategy that focuses on paying off debts in order from smallest to largest. So for example, if you have 3 credit cards, one you owe 1,000, one you owe 100, one you owe 50. In the debt snowball method, you would pay the 150 first, then you would pay the one that's 100, and then you would move on to the ones 1,000. Keep in mind with this strategy, you do have to keep all minimum payments made, but essentially you would make the minimum payments on all of the bills or expenses that you have, and then any extra that you were paying on those, now you would allocate to the smallest bill. And the reason this one is important, because it kind of gets that sense of accomplishment, much faster, and then motivation is there. So once again, if you have like 10 debts that you need to pay, with this strategy here, you get to feel that we actually making progress, by eliminating that smaller debt first. And essentially, once you eliminate the smaller debt, then you take all of that money and then you roll it into the next one, and so on and so on. Next, we have the avalanche method. The avalanche method focuses on paying off the debt with the highest interest rate first, prioritizing debt costs, saves the most interest over time. It aims to eliminate high interest debt more quickly. So, just for example, if you have, one card interest rate 29%, the other card interest rate 20%, you would want to try to pay off the one at 29% first. When we talk about credit cards, if you not sure, if you pull a credit card statement and look on like the very last page, it'll usually tell you, how much interest you're paying. And I recommend doing that for all your cards because oftentimes people may be using one card over another, not realizing that the card they're using, is charging considerably more interest than the one that they're not using. But that is the avalanche method. And then for those who have a lot of different debts at a lot of different places, it may be an option to do a debt consolidation. Debt consolidation is where you essentially take a loan to pay off all the small debts that you have. So versus having, J.C. Penney's, a Macy's card, a gas card, two bank credit cards, all of these with varying balances, you would go in and get a loan and essentially pay all of those down to zero and now just make the payments of the loan. This is probably the best way to eliminate debt. But once again, we talk about the cycle. This is also a way that they pull you into the cycle because what often happens is people clear out all those cards. And now they're making this one payment, and next thing you know, they start running the cards back up. And now, you're paying two payments. So this is a great way to eliminate all of these variant balances, but you have to really be committed to this because you don't want to in turn run those items back up. Next, we have ways to save. Once again, it's great to talk about different budget, but I really want to try to give you some actual tips that you can actually implement. Automated savings, I'm definitely a firm believer on that. What that just means is your savings should happen automatically. So whether you choose a 10%, 20%, if you need to make that a dollar amount, I truly believe that you should either have it coming directly off your direct deposit going into that account, or you should have it set up so, for example, with your bank, if you get paid every other Friday, you can set it up so every other Friday, automatically X amount goes from your checking into your savings. And when you do it that way, when you wake up, it's already done. So it takes a lot of that guesswork out. A lot of times for us, if we don't do it in a moment, then it never gets done. So I'm a firm believer in your savings has to be automated. There's also a no spend weekend. So, if you do like to go out and do different activities on the weekend, maybe you earmark one weekend a month where, hey, I'm not going to spend. Maybe it starts off with not as much, then maybe it goes down to nothing. And what you do then is you take that money, you place it in savings, you could deploy it to pay down the debt, but essentially you don't spend anything for a weekend and you reallocate that money. We have purchase delay. Sometimes that works for me. I'll say, if I'm in the store looking at something, I may be like, let me go. I'm not going to buy it now. Let me check online. And oftentimes online, you can get it at a different price. So what this does is kind of takes down a lot of impulse buying. I know we've all been to the grocery store and we, go in, just telling myself a lot of times I'll try not to grab a basket or a cart. But I still find that my hands can hold the same amount as a basket or a cart. So, really with this one here, it's just about really evaluating the expenses and assessing, do I need this in this moment? Can I wait a little while? Can I, possibly save up and then buy it versus buying it on credit? Different things like that can help you navigate your spending. Very important as well, maxing out your company 401k, which we'll talk a little bit about next week. But for those who work for a company who provides some form of matching what you put in, that will be, one of my most important segues. You should definitely be putting in everything they will match. And I'll even tell you that a lot of times that comes out pre-tax, so it doesn't have as much of an input as you would think. So for example, if your company matches 6% of what you put in, you should be putting in 6%. If it's 3%, you should put in 3%. Ideally, you want to put in more, but your starting ground should be whatever they match, because this is money that whatever you put in, the company has decided because you put it in, they will give you that money as well. So if you're not familiar, if you have some type of retirement, definitely would ask my HR, as early as tomorrow, do we have any form of match? And then review yourself to make sure you're putting that in. Another thing too to help save, a lot of times prepping for grocery shopping, I find that groceries are very, very expensive now, just depending on what you need. So a lot of times it can help, if you make a list when you go in. Also, a lot of people now, they shop online and pick up their groceries, which helps, cut down a lot of the impulse buying when you get into the grocery store, when you're seeing different things like that. If you go ahead and order them, you don't even have to step foot into the grocery store. You can just, pull up and pick them up. So once again, just want to thank everybody. I truly understand that time these days is very precious, very important. But I did want to sincerely thank everyone for taking time out and attending this. Like I said, I'm looking forward to all the things that ABC is implementing around finances and helping us as a church get our finances in order and not just succeed but thrive. But I did want to sincerely thank everyone for taking some time out to attend tonight, and I definitely look forward to the additional next Wednesday at 7, and then the following Wednesday at 7 as well. And last but not least, I told Pastor I'll try to keep this to an hour, so we got about 15 minutes. So I'm gonna check the chat, and if you have a question, if you know how to raise your hand, they'll allow me to call on you. If not, you can go ahead and just jump in, and I'll be glad to answer any questions for you.
Ron, while persons are formulating any questions they may have, man, I want to say thank you for the thorough discussion tonight and overview of our first topic area as it relates to budgeting and what was it, budgeting, what was the other?
Personal finance.
Yeah, budgeting and personal finance. Yes. I love the statement that you made in reference to taking action, and I think right now I'm excited, man. We got about 18 people on our call tonight. And if there were to be some homework, some take action steps for the group for tonight that you would suggest to us, what would some of those be?
One thing I would definitely say is you go back and review your bank statement, or if you have an app, review your last 30 days of activity. It's very, very important that you, like I talked about in here, know where your money is going. So I think that's always step one. Go back and look. I mean, I've even been through mine. Sometimes I'm like, wait a minute, I got this streaming and that streaming. Well, I don't watch this one anymore. I don't use this anymore. Or sometimes, like for example, my wife has Apple Music. I have Spotify, but it'd be cheaper if we just both got Apple Music, so little things like that, when you talk about, managing your money, like I said, a lot of these things, they're only $9, it's only $10, it's only $15, but then you add it up and you got $150 a month for streaming, well, then you might as well just go get Verizon and get the full package, so different things like that. So that would be step one. I would encourage everyone to do is go back and review, I mean, a lot of us now, you got a credit card that you use for this. You might have another card that you use, credit card you use for that. And then you also might have your checking account where these bills are coming out. So you might have 4 to 5 different places where money is coming out from. And most people are not checking every single one all the time. So I would say Pastor is the first place to start, but go back over the last 30 days, the last 60 days, and line by line, look at everywhere money is going out to and make a list of, do I need it? Do I not? Should I change it? Should I not? Like I said, for example, I had Stars, but the show I was watching not on there anymore. So it's like, I'll get it back next season, and it comes back around. So, that would be a great place to start.
Okay. I believe there are two questions in that are in the chat. I, I do have one that I want just you to follow up on, and it's in relationship to the budget. I know you gave the general percentages. One, you gave the 50% needs, the 20% savings, and the other, in reference to that, and then the other 70-21. Now within those percentages in those categories, I know, I have personally read that, you need to allot, percentages to everything. Like when it comes to how much, should what percentage should your car pay, your car be, and what percentage should you be putting in housing and stuff like that. Is there a tool that you have that you can recommend? So within those percentages that would give persons a guide for how much we should be, allotting in those various categories?
I don't know if I can definitely find one and share. I'll probably say NerdWallet probably has the closest thing I've seen to that, but I know what you're referring to because I definitely heard that before as well. Where like before you make, for example, if you need to buy a mortgage is a good one. You know, if you get a mortgage, a lot of times they'll review all your debt and say, hey, for your mortgage, it can only be 45%, of your income.
Right.
But then you got to look at that and say, well, actually, that's too high. That payment
Exactly.
actually puts me
Exactly.
there. So I'll find that pass and I'll have that ready for the group next week because I do know what you're talking about. I would say NerdWallet does have the breakdown for the 50, 30, 20 on there. But I know what you're saying, just when you evaluate these expenses, is there just like a guideline to like, hey, my car payment should be roughly this much. My rent should be roughly this amount of my income.
Right.
And
Right.
what I explained, it falls into that category, but that's even deeper diving into, breaking down the allocation of your finances.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And you
Yeah.
can, I don't, have you had a chance to read some of those other questions yet?
Yeah, the first question is what strategies can one use to help your savings account grow with interest or dividends and other than a money market savings plan? I will say, shameless plug, next week definitely will have a lot of great insights for you to grow that money faster. But just to answer your question, if you haven't checked with your bank in a while, a lot of banks have, CD rates that are much higher. I'll just give an example, at Wells Fargo, the savings account is like 0.02%. You could get a 4-month CD for roughly 4%. So the first place I would say is if you're comfortable with online, you can just go to your bank's website and look at, CDs, but usually, and I'll just quickly explain it with a savings account. If you truly just have a savings account, that money can come and go. You can transfer it out anytime. It's really no restrictions. So the bank is not going to pay as much money on that. If you take advantage of what they call, and I don't, you can definitely let me know if you're familiar with a CD and a time account. Quick explanation: that's where the bank holds the money for a certain amount of time, and you penalized if you want to get access to it. Well, now because they've put that barrier to entry there, they provide more interest. We all know how the bank work. They use the money that's sitting there to make money off of it. So if they know that your money is going to sit there for 4 months, they're willing to provide more return, on that money. So if you're looking for, I would say like FDIC insured options or just a quick option, most banks and financial institutions now, if you look at CDs, a lot of times they'll have short term, even some longer term that's going to provide you much more interest than just keeping it in a savings account.
Thanks, Ron. I
Yeah.
think Lady J had another question
Yeah.
about, can you say a bit more about the 70-20-10 principle?
Let me see. Yeah. Can you say more about the 70-20-10 principle? Let me see. 70-20-10 principle. With that one, you pretty much the 70% of your income is just allocated for your expenses. And what the difference is with this one, it kind of lumps needs and wants in together. So that's the real main difference between that one. Instead of having needs at 50% and wants at 30%, it just lumps all that spending in together and just says, hey, you should be saving 20% and 10% should go to debt pay down. So that's just a real main principle with that one. Your take home pay, 70% of that would just be allocated to needs and wants, 20% for savings, and 10% to pay down debt. So that's just a quick explanation. If you need me to expand further, just let me know. But that's just to sum that one up. Another question I seen here, which do I feel would be the best to eliminate debt? A lot of times the debt snowball or the debt avalanche is usually the two easy one. I would say the debt snowball. A lot of times that one works a little bit better because you get that instant gratification, when you get something paid down. But as anything I would say, with finances, you got to kind of know yourself. So even when you're talking about a budget, if you are a spender, then you need to be saving before you spend. If you are a lot of people, have a cousin who he's like an extreme saver. So he will save every dollar and then transfer back, as he wants to spend. You have to know yourself, just like many things in life when it comes to money. You have to really do a self-reflection to understand which one. Because like I said, some people, they need that instant gratification to stay motivated. Other people, that card that has the highest interest rate, that payment is so big, you need to get that paid down first to really free up money. So a lot of it is really specific, but I would say if I had to pick one, I would probably say the debt snowball is probably, probably one of the most popular ones too. I think that was from Dave Ramsey. So, if you're not familiar with Dave Ramsey, I mean, he's the financial guru. He's a great starting place if you need information as well. Next question, how to remain those percentages for housing when escrow increases periodically due to rising housing prices? That is very, very true. That is where, like Pastor talked about, when you are purchasing a home, you got to kind of factor in that, once again, if they say, hey, you can get 40%, you got to look at that number and make sure. You can't really do anything about property taxes. I will say, depending on your age bracket, they do have different ways where you may become tax exempt if you fall into those categories, which you can look up, with your local, ordinance. But one thing I do know about escrows and mortgages, make sure when you're looking at it, is it your homeowner's insurance or is it your homeowner's insurance? Is your property insurance? Is it both? A lot of times, what'll happen is, like you say, your house will go up, you can't control it, but then your insurance may go up too, which really drives your payment up. So if your insurance is going up, that is something you can control. So, if your insurance, homeowner's insurance goes up, that is something you can call them, negotiate, possibly looking at a different one. But essentially, when you talk about a budget, if that cost for your mortgage is going up, a lot of times in the budget, it's one or two things you got to do. You either got to get more income or you got to cut expenses. So every time you're looking at your budget, if something changes, there's really the only two options. You either got to find more money, whether that's working a second job, getting a side job, or you got to look at where the other money is going and decide that, like, hey, I can cut this out to allocate for that increase in expenses. But that's a very good question because, like I said, I'm very empathetic to know that, like, a lot of times once you get into the aspect of, a home, you can't change it. So if you went in and you bought it and it was like right at the top, you can't go back on it now. But any of the budgeting, aspects or really avenues that you need, once again, it comes down to two things. A lot of times you either got to cut something out or you got to make more money. And that's, like I said, when you locked in on these things, that's really the way you kind of got to do it. I mean, some people say things like roommates and stuff like that, but I know that's not always feasible. Let me see. Simply, that's good. Spenders need to save before they spend. Yes, that is definitely, know yourself. That's very important with your finances. Know yourself. Yep. So they have done an insurance review with their agent. Yep, and that's very, very important because, like I said, sometimes with that, when you talk about that too, I hope they were able to find some savings. If they're not able to find some savings, I definitely would explore, possibly looking into other insurance company as well. But once again, once you talk about the escrow, once their property tax go up, it's not coming back down. So you have to find a way to, reallocate some of those funds. Don't know your interest rate, but it might be an opportunity to possibly refinance. I know now it's probably not the best time, but there may be something that you could keep an eye out for as well, just depending on your rate. And also, I say too, if you have a more specific question, I wouldn't mind sitting down with you and kind of like looking at it, like numbers for numbers. But I would just tell you once again, if expenses are fixed, you either gonna have to find more money or like cut the spending. That's really the only two ways to get out of a budget and jam is one of those two avenues. I think that was all the questions that I saw on there. Got a couple minutes left. I don't know if everyone is familiar with the chat or not, but I mean, if there was one or two people who wanted to open up their line and ask a question, I could take that with the last few minutes. So give you a minute or two for that.
Ron, I know we're going into investing on next week. For some of the people that will be on for next week and going into that, is there anything you want us to prep for as it relates to that discussion?
Biggest thing with that, I would, if you have any questions, that definitely helps target, what we need to present. But I also recommend, if you familiar with Yahoo Finance, I would recommend downloading that app. It's Yahoo Finance. Is in every app store. If you're not familiar with apps, You can go to, the website as well, just Yahoo Finance. And this will be my homework. It's called DOW, the Dow Jones. I'd like you to pull that up and just look at that. And what that is that's just the entire stock market wrapped into, one portfolio. So that'll be my homework. Yahoo Finance, look up the Dow, and just, kind of get familiarized with just, just looking at something in an investment realm.
Okay. All right. So download the Yahoo Finance app.
Yes.
Look at the Dow and be ready to come and dive into the conversation on investing for next week.
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome, man. Thank you so much, Ron. Any closing thoughts? If not, I'll pray us out.
Yeah, no, once again, just really appreciate everyone who attended. I know, it's not easy 7 o'clock on on a Wednesday night, but I do thank everybody for attending. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Definitely have a lot of passion around investing in our community and in our church. And that's the way we're gonna move the bar. And we talk about needing more money, that investing can help.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. Ron, you did a thorough job, man. I really appreciate it, man. I thank you for your heart and commitment. And man, we right at an hour. So man, this was good. So I'm not going to belabor it. I just want to pray for everybody on this journey as we prepare to close tonight. Father, I thank you for Ron and his labor and his passion and heart and commitment in this area and willingly sharing of his resources and his wealth of knowledge. We thank you for him. Father, for every person that's on this call, the varying financial situations, I pray right now, God, for wisdom. I pray right now that you would give us discernment and help us, God, to begin to implement strategies so that, God, we can begin to improve our financial situations. And we're praying that bondages of financial debt will be broken. And we are believing you, God, for our future as it relates to our finances, and financial freedom is in our future. And so, God, regardless of our age, regardless of how big the mountain may seem, we know, God, that you are a mountain mover. And God, you will give us the strength to tunnel through and move. And so I pray right now, God, that you just give us discipline and discernment, and begin, Holy Spirit, to begin to download to us a strategy that we can take from tonight and begin to implement it into our systems and our lives. In Jesus' name, we all say together, amen. Y'all, God bless y'all. Have an amazing night, and we'll be right back next week at 7 p.m.